Hello, welcome to day 2 of Radio Days and this conversation with KJ. So if you're Malaysian, you already know about KJ. Everyone knows KJ. But if you're a foreign visitor, let me just catch you up a little bit. KJ was a former politician, a member of the conservative side of politics, whose party was in power for quite some years. He worked his way up to ministerial level. He was a minister for youth and for sport. And during COVID, he was the Minister for Health, which would be either a very popular or unpopular role, depending on which side of vaccination policy you're on. And then he kind of got a bit too popular for his own party, and some people thought that this may not be such a good thing. And they, when the next election came up, they assigned him an unwinnable seat. And from a seat that had been won by the other party with margin of about 30,000 people, he turned it round and almost won it, but didn't. So after a long period of some decades in politics, he was unemployed. So what did he do? He started a podcast, and that led him to an offer for radio. He's now a breakfast team member on Hot FM, Media Prima radio station. His podcast has become very successful, and he's now a multimedia figure in this country. This is KJ. So is that a fair summary of a long and influential career?
Thanks, Steve. That was a very kind introduction. I think that's largely accurate.
Largely accurate. Good. You've now branched out into the media, so that's a catch-up. It's only been a little over a year.
Yeah.
But take me to where you are now.
So, as Steve mentioned, I'd been in politics for more than 2 decades, and I suppose the pivot towards media is something natural for politicians. I think a lot of politicians who either retire or are forced to stay out end up doing some form of broadcasting or media work, especially if they're comfortable in front of the camera on air. It's to do with communicating ideas, and I think a lot of us in the political world have done that throughout our careers. But it's also, I think, instructive in my case, where I didn't just move into a space that was already created, which was radio, and thanks to Nazri and everyone at Media Prima Audio for having me on radio, but also in creating my own platform. And I thought that was the big difference. A lot of ex-political personalities end up on TV, end up on radio as hosts, presenters, but not many of us have been able to carve out a space or platform that's emerging or that's new, and that's what we've done on our podcast, Keluar Sekejap. So that keeps me busy. I mean, I go on radio once a week, sometimes twice a week, so now it's survey month, so I'm on radio on Mondays and Fridays. That bookends the week for me, and that's light. We don't touch on policy, we don't touch on politics. That's more a light touch on how people are doing, lifestyle, and then I do my podcast once or twice a week, and that's heavy, that's long form, that's 1 hour, 1.5 hours. We deep dive into issues and things like that. Of course, we slice it up and we distribute it on different platforms. Yeah.
When you first were on air, I was listening, and you were pretty comfortable, but I also thought that you were the joke in a way, because you were a former politician and you had this team of people and they were making fun of you and you were happy with that and you played along. But in recent months when I've been listening, I think you've learnt how to give it back to them too.
Yeah. So for the context of those of you who are not Malaysians, and for Malaysians who don't listen to Hot FM, I joined an entrenched breakfast team. So given any given survey, it's either number one, number two. It's very competitive. So I joined this breakfast team, which had already been around for a couple of years. Three very, very prominent radio personalities. So you can imagine in your country's prominent radio breakfast team. So I came on as the fourth member. And I think, yeah, you're right, Steve. I think they were having fun with me. I think they were laughing at me at first. Now I hope that they're laughing with me. I'm not quite sure.
In fact, I think you've turned the tables, and I often hear you paying them back.
It was uncomfortable because, I come from a different world. I'd like to think that I have a sense of humor, but as a politician, coming from a world that's highly, highly rigid, highly protocol-based, into something where every other sentence is a joke, every other sentence is a punchline, is very difficult. And to have to think that way at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning is almost impossible. So it was difficult. I was fish out of water. But I think I'm holding my own now.
Yeah,
not
I
too
think
bad,
so too.
Not too bad. Yeah.
One of the other things that you talked about when you were at the beginning of your media career was you told the story of how your former party boss didn't want to see your face anymore once they expelled you from the party. But you've been so commercially successful that your face is on a lot of advertising and products and billboards now.
I mean, revenge is so sweet, right? So not only was I sent to an unwinnable seat at the last election, after that I was expelled from my political party, a party which I dedicated 25 years of my life to. And when you're expelled from your party, obviously, the party leadership wants you to fade away into the night and die a political death. And radio, podcast, it's given me this second lease of life. So, I'm very thankful, I'm very grateful, I'm very privileged. It's given me opportunities to represent brands, to be on billboards. I mean, in the past, as a politician, I'd have to pay people to put my face on the billboard. Now I get paid for it. And there was a point where my face was everywhere. And I can imagine my ex-party boss wasn't too happy about it.
And is that bringing commercial success for you?
Yeah, so, this is a new world to me. This is your world. I didn't know that this thing pays. I used to do media work as a politician because that was my job. I would go on radio, I'd go on TV. Nobody would pay me as a minister to appear because that was my public service. I was there as a public official. I didn't know you guys made so much money.
There you are, see?
I didn't know. I mean, now I'm monetizing every single thing about me. Today is free, by the way. So it's...
You'll pay at the door on the way.
Look, guys, I didn't know. I mean, the first thing I did when I started my podcast, it took a while. I think it took about 30 episodes before we got our first inquiry. They came to me and said, do you have a rate card? I was like, what the hell is a rate card? I didn't even know what a rate card was. So once I figured out what a rate card was, then I got a friend to come in to become the business manager for our podcast. Then we have to start pricing ourselves accordingly, trying to figure out the data. There's no data. Podcast is something new, not just in Malaysia, but all over the world. So we don't know how to price ourselves. But now we have a better idea. And I'm very thankful because the work I do at the radio, at Hot FM, that opens up a lot of commercial opportunities for branding, for endorsements, and of course, it opens up the industry for me to tap into for the podcast as well.
Well, let's talk about the podcast industry and how it's growing here. You were an initiator of a recent Podfest, which could well, over time, turn into some kind of podcast industry leadership group.
Yeah. So, in media, we don't like things to be highly regulated. I'm sure all of you agree with this. But we understand that there has to be some form of regulation, if only to put in certain guardrails so that the harmful aspects of fake news, of cyberbullying, of online grooming can be curbed. So podcasts in Malaysia fall under the unregulated media space right now. And, it's really exciting on the next door.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we've been thinking about how to ensure that this emerging platform of podcasts, because eventually at some point, I believe eventually at some point, the regulators will come knocking on the door. At the moment, they're not, but if you look at our viewership data, if you look at the subscriber data, we're growing, and we're growing fast. And this is a trend all over the world. Podcasts are growing fast, and sometimes eclipses traditional platforms like radio. So eventually the regulators will come to us and say, hey, look, we need to make sure that some of this is regulated, and we can understand that. So I thought, rather than waiting for the regulators to come, I'd reach out to some of the other podcasts in Malaysia. So we had a Podfest. That was a live show over 2 days of all the top podcasts in Malaysia. We also had workshops where people who were aspiring podcasters would come, and we would give workshops on how to set up a podcast technically and how to set up a podcast editorially. But it's resulted in us, of course, having this loose network of podcasts where one day, if the regulator or when the regulator comes knocking on our doors, we'll be, at least we know each other. They know that I was formerly in government, and perhaps we can have a united and common stand as to what we think is reasonable when it comes to guardrails and regulations.
Well, you have that experience on both sides of the fence as a politician, as a minister with departments that put in regulatory guidelines. Yep. So you understand that. Let me talk about something that's current at the moment. There's just this last month, the government has started to bring in regulations on social media platforms. So we're not talking podcasts, but we're talking the big picture controversy that all societies are facing now, which is the power of social media platforms that are pretty much unregulated because they claim to be international companies. And Malaysia is like where I come from, Australia and Europe. In this country, you're starting to bring in regulation about that. But the big platforms are fighting back. They've formed a group called AIC here, Internet Regulatory or Internet Representative Body, and they're pushing back against government regulation. What are your thoughts on that from both sides of the fence?
I mean, I think it's to be expected that the big online service platforms are pushing back against regulation because they want to operate in an environment where, as you said, Steve, that's international, they're cross-border, they're not accountable for a lot of things that they put up on their platforms. For them, the mantra is, of course, self-regulation. But on the other side, and I speak as somebody formerly from government, but now a content creator, I understand where the government is coming from because there is tremendous harm that is being perpetrated online, whether it's financial scams, cyberbullying, whether it is grooming, whether it's child pornography. And these things are very, very difficult to regulate when you have online service platforms. And I'm talking about the big ones. So the regulation that has been suggested by the government is where there are at least 8 million Malaysian users. So you're talking about your Instagrams, your X's, your WhatsApp, messaging platforms where it's very, very difficult to hold the online service platform company to account. So I think what the government's doing now is understandable, and I support this. I want to make sure that the guardrails are fair. The guardrails do not curb fair criticism. I think that's a lot of concern in Malaysia has been, yes, we support it for the right reasons, but we want to make sure that these guardrails and the regulation does not stifle legitimate criticism and legitimate discussion. So that's the fine line that the regulators will have to discuss right now. Two things, Steve. One is a lot of these companies say that they are a conduit for neutral information. I don't think this is true. Because I think there is a black box of algorithm that powers a lot of these things, which is unaccountable, which we do not know what that algorithm, how that algorithm is created and what it perpetuates. And if you look at some platforms, of course, most notoriously is X or Twitter, It leads to highly polarized echo chambers, and a lot of it is just blatantly either racist or promoting or inciting, in some cases, racial hatred. And secondly, when it comes to self-regulation, which is what these companies claim they do, they're not doing that. I mean, if you go into any of these platforms on any given day, and if unfortunately you've been clicking on certain messages or certain people, or individuals or accounts on these messaging platforms, online platforms, you'd be quite disturbed as to the sort of things that are not regulated.
The thing that worries me is that the algorithm's primary purpose is to keep people on that platform for longer. Yeah. So if you see the same stuff, then, after 3 or 4 videos or whatever, it's like, okay, I'm over it. But if it gets more extreme or more radical or whatever, then it hooks you in.
Yeah.
And that's the primary purpose, and that can work very badly against social cohesion and social harmony, and even what they claim that they champion, which is free discussion, because, as you said, it polarizes views.
It's only free discussion if the algorithm, the black box of that algorithm, is not doing what it's doing. But if what it's doing is self-reinforcing a certain echo chamber and polarizing and radicalizing people's views, then I don't think you're really a conduit for free discussion, are you?
No, yeah. That's true. Our Minister for Communications, one day, if you're not Prime Minister, you might be Minister again. If you ever go back into politics, you could take up the communications portfolio. Would you mandate that they make their algorithm public?
I mean, that requires coordinated action from different countries. It's very difficult for one jurisdiction to try to force these companies to try to, open up the source code for the algorithms and all that. And I don't even know if that's technically possible. But I would certainly sit down with the industry to discuss the guardrails. And I think the government here is doing that right now. So in principle, I support it. I want to see where it goes. I want to see what the framework of regulation is. It's not been announced yet. There's been some initial public discussion about annual license that needs to be adhered to. But if it's an annual license, but at the end of the day, you still get away with, these companies can still get away by not clamping down on messages which, as I said, reinforce race hate, targets, allows for cyberbullying, then it defeats the purpose of the regulation.
Yeah. The other element to that, of course, is that those big companies are taking money out of the advertising agencies in this country, but not necessarily returning it in terms of content or whatever, whereas licensed broadcasters and local production companies are doing exactly that. So that's another element.
I think this is a challenge that all of us face, right? I mean, a lot of these big tech companies, and we work together with them. Look, I'm not here to bash the big tech companies because we rely on them. I post my stuff on these platforms every week, every day. But their business model is highly extractive in a sense that they take a lot of value out of the local content creation. We're creating a lot of content. They use a lot of that content without paying for it, without necessarily valuing it the right way. And I think this is something that a lot of jurisdictions, not just Malaysia, but all of you are facing, where they're taking the advertising dollars, they're posting stuff that we're creating on their platforms, and they're not accountable for it. So there has to be a reckoning. I don't know what that reckoning is. I don't, I'm a content creator. I'm not here to declare war on the big tech companies, but I do think that it's extractive at the moment.
Yeah. I'm going to throw the floor open in a moment. So if you have a question, think about it. We'll have time for a few questions. So be quick. Put your hand up when I ask you, and some microphones will come around. If you were Communications Minister, is there anything else you would do for the industry?
Yeah, I think the one thing that we need is capacity building. So again, to what extent should the government be doing this, or to what extent should industry groupings and associations be doing this? It could be a shared responsibility, could be a grant that's being given by the government to industry associations. But I think as you have more and different platforms emerging. We were having this discussion earlier between radio and podcasts. A lot of people are pivoting toward podcasts. Not being regulated is one thing, but not having the tools, the training, the capacity to produce something that is professional, something that's fair, and something that will do justice to people who are investing and advertising through podcasts, I think important. And just doing the Podfest recently and doing the workshops, I think we could do a lot more with capacity building, because everyone now wants to be a YouTuber, everyone now wants to be a podcaster, and for a lot of us, we bootstrap our way to doing it. But I think we would elevate the entire scene by having a lot of support in terms of capacity building. Technical capacity building, how to do it properly. Of course, the content, you're free to do whatever you want, but I think there's a role for industry associations and government in order to elevate the standards of these new platforms.
Yeah, great point. All right. Do you have a question? Put your hand up and a microphone will come to you. First one down the front here. Microphone holders.
Hi, Chief. Morning.
Hi.
Okay, you have been a politician, so you definitely have a political mindset. Okay, how do you shift your mindset into entertainment in your new role as an announcer? There might be times when political issue comes up, but I guess you can't always comment on them. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm fortunate in a sense that I operate both in radio, commercial radio, as well as podcasts. If I didn't have my podcast, then I'd be really frustrated, and I may say something political on radio. But because I have my podcast, I know to keep my mouth shut when I'm on Nazri's radio. So I have my outlet. And I'm very, very careful, the commercial radio, not because I want to censor myself, but because I understand the remit and the mandate for commercial radio is different. I'm there to make people happy on a Monday morning. I mean, what is the worst time of the week? It's Monday mornings, and I'm there. I'm there for you. I'm there to make you laugh. I'm there for you to laugh at me. I'm there to dance on TikTok, whatever. I have no dignity left, Steve, by the way. I think my political brain is always operating, but it's always operating in a way that I know when to say what and what to say when. Of course, my podcast is different. That's when I go all out politically, right? And I think it's, you were spot on when you said entertainment. So I don't know if I can say this, but with the numbers that we have, I think I can say this. We've turned politics into entertainment. And a lot of people are doing that with political podcasts. They've turned politics into entertainment. They've turned history into entertainment. Some of my favorite podcasts are The Rest is History, Empire. Who wants to listen to these things? I do. For 1.5 hours, I'd listen to, William Dalrymple and Anita Anand talk about the Vietnam War, and it's fantastic. So we've been able to turn politics into entertainment, where people are actually willing to listen to us for 1.5 hours, 2 hours, talking about politics. So to me, that sort of reconciles where I am. It's not just entertainment, but it's bringing my old life into entertainment.
I think that's a really important thing too, because people who might find traditional politics boring will turn off. But if you make them interested, then they'll engage with politics and society will be better all around.
Yeah, Steve, so one of the most common comments that I get on the street is that, people come up to me and said, look, I really didn't care about politics before, but because of your podcast, I'm into politics. And that's great, because
that's a good thing.
Part of the mandate and part of the mission of our podcast is to educate not just ourselves, the podcasters, but also the lay public. Because let's face it, a lot of political issues just go, phew. I mean, even for me, I don't understand some of these things. So to make it accessible, I think has been a great privilege for us.
Congratulations on
Thank
that too. Another question, Nazri.
Chief.
You're going to ask me if you pay me enough, right? The answer is no.
Can I? Okay, actually I have two questions. So after 1 year plus now, almost coming to 2 years that you've come on the light side, the fun side, that's radio. What perspective do you have in terms of from where you were as a minister before, that you see the connection with the people and how radio have really opened your eyes on views on that? What are your thoughts? Your thoughts on that?
That's a good question, Nazri. I think, you know, one key takeaway from radio that I get outside of the political world is that messages need to be simple and relatable. And I think that's the great power of radio. The great power of radio is that it speaks to you in a way that makes you feel comfortable. And I find that sometimes in politics, of course, we don't do that. We don't do that at all. Whether this can be a lesson applied if I ever go back into politics, I'm not sure. I'd love to see the converse of this. Now I've gone from politics to radio, whether I can do radio back to politics, and whether or not some of the lessons that I've learned over the last 1.5, 2 years can be applied. But I think the other thing I want to say, Nazri, is that, you know, for the last 20 years, people spoke to me as an elected representative, as a politician. Can you do this? Or they'd be nice to me because they want something. Now they talk to me as a friend, because they know that I'm a trusted voice on radio. I don't know trusted voice, but a voice on radio. So I think that's been transformational in my own life, because I hear things that I don't hear before. Before, people have an agenda when they talk to me. Now they just want to tell me that, you know, can you say this? Can you say something? Can you raise this issue? Or, you know, I thought you were funny. I thought this didn't work. So it's great.
I remember you've talked before about when people come up to you in the supermarket or something, and you have this moment where you try and work out, is this someone who's listened to me on the radio or someone who's listened to my podcast? Yeah. Have you figured that out? Can you categorize them?
So middle-aged, male, Malaysian will 100% almost be a podcast consumer. Females, almost 100% will be radio consumer. And the data shows this. We do very, very well on the podcast with middle-aged Malaysian men. And the radio is a bit more broad, diverse. So we've been thinking in the podcast how to, you know, broaden our reach. But then we came to the conclusion that, you know, maybe that's just where we operate. So I get a lot of people coming up to me, and, you know, when they're coming to me, as Steve's mentioned, when they're coming to me in the supermarket or on the streets, I'm playing this game in my mind. Does this person know me from the podcast or from the radio? And, you know, inevitably they come and they will say, you know, I love your podcast, or I love you on radio. And I'm getting most of it right now. Yeah.
We've got time for one more question. Be quick.
One more.
Oh, okay.
Ooh, wow. What was it just now,
Nazri,
Steve?
time's up. We've got to go to the public here. This gentleman here with the hat.
Okay, thank you.
He is the boss. We'll allow him the question at the end.
Morning, Steve. Morning, KJ. I'm Radit from Indonesia. Nice to meet you. I agree you are very, very popular here, because yesterday I saw a mineral bottle water with your face on it.
Okay.
So I know you are.
Did you buy it? Did you buy it?
Yes, of course.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. KJ, what we know in politics is that there will definitely be enemies or political opponents. Yeah. I wonder how your political opponents will react when they find out that KJ jadi DJ show is very popular in Malaysia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Super question. I mean, look, you can't get 100% of the listeners of the crowd, right? I mean, there will be political detractors who have tuned out of Hot FM because I'm there, but not. And I've discovered this. The majority of the audience is not political. and you can do this survey in any country. Most people are not political. Yeah, sure, they're political during elections because that's when they want to vote. But most people, during the 5 years between elections, if your election cycle is 5 years, they're not that political to the extent that they want to, tune out of a particular radio station or TV station just because somebody there doesn't share their political views. So I think that, and I'm sure, Nazri and the team at Media Prima Audio thought about this, bringing KJ in. Will that bring in people or will it repel people? But thankfully, after 1.5 years, we've gone from being number 2, number 3, number 1 now, radio station, depending on the survey that you read. And they've not sacked me, so obviously things are okay. And the other thing is, I notice, is that, sometimes I read comments on X, it's highly negative for mental health to read Twitter, but sometimes I do, torture myself. And, I know that a lot of the detractors, they don't want to share content that I create because they know that that creates traction for me, it creates subscribers for me. But that's where I play with the content. So I will say things which will force and provoke a reaction. Sometimes I do that because, entertainment, politics is entertainment. If I say things that's just plain vanilla, it's going to be boring. So sometimes I deliberately elicit a reaction, and I know when I do that, it creates that engagement, even with enemies, even with detractors. So, the thing that I enjoy the most is not just the engagement, but living rent-free in the heads of my detractors. When I say something, and they clearly do not like me, but they're talking about it.
That's nice. All right, we'll give the last question to the boss of Media Prima. Take the microphone back to the front here.
Okay, Chief. Just to reset, when you were in Munich, you did an interview right after your talk, right? So you did mention, and the video was taken and went viral in Malaysia. Everybody picked it up. The question was, will you be the next PM? Are you looking forward to that? And you said yes, right? So now, after 1.5 years being in radio, really, putting yourself out there and all that, what will you change in terms of regulation that's tight in Malaysia? And we were talking about Malaysia doesn't celebrate Valentine's Day in radio. We are heavy regulated, and you yourself are really well self-regulated. But podcasters, digital, social media influencers, and all that, they're not. Radio ourselves, we do our compliance training, reminding our team to follow the 3R, race, religion, royalty. Now, if you are going to be that in the future, what do you think can change and to help the industry like ours?
I think you hit a nail on the head just now when you said that the radio industry does its own compliance training. And I think that's a much better way to approach this rather than having heavy and cumbersome regulations. All industries don't like heavily regulated frameworks. But I think it's incumbent upon the industry themselves to, as I said, build capacity and to actually work things out on their own. You do the training. So Nazri mentioned 3R just now. For those of you who are not from Malaysia, 3 Rs are the red lines in Malaysia that you don't cross. So race, religion, royalty. So essentially, those are the topics or the issues where you want to make sure that you're not offside. Because if you're offside, it's not just inappropriate politics, but actually you can be charged in court. But rather than having regulations which punish you if you color outside of the lines, that training is important. So coming back to podcasts, Steve, we don't have this training yet. So I know a lot of podcasts in Malaysia which will not fly on radio, on TV. Language that they use, swear words, they color outside the lines when it comes to 3R. Some of the financial podcasts peddle products which are not regulated. But there will be an equilibrium when the threat of regulation comes. So if I'm in that situation, I don't like heavy-handed regulation. We don't like to be living in a nanny state. unless, of course, it's for health purposes or something that is extremely serious. But I think when you want a light touch, you really need the other side to play ball, which is the industry. And the industry has to be facilitated in order to strengthen and build that capacity. And also read the room. I think the industry has to read the room. You can read the room because you've been in media for the longest time. So you can bring radio together, other radio stations together and say, look guys, we've been in this industry for 20, 30 years. We know what the red lines are as far as 3R is concerned. So let's not go beyond this. But, societies evolve. Mores change. Sensitivities and sensibilities change. So that's something also that you want to have a discussion about.
Former politician, broadcaster, podcaster, Kerry Jamaluddin, KJ, thank you very much for your time
Thank you, Steve.
today.
Thank you.
Please
Thank you
thank
very much.
KJ.